The snow fell in silence over Vienna, blanketing the narrow streets in a deceptive calm. Inside the dimly lit cafe on Maria Hilferstrasse, Agent Elias Kerr sat alone at a corner table, his black gloves resting beside a half-finished cup of bitter coffee. To the world, he was an unremarkable man, the kind people passed every day and never remembered. But beneath the ordinary suit and the steady gaze was a weapon, finely honed and dangerously obedient. Across from him, a man in a gray coat slid an envelope across the table. No words, no hesitation. The kind of silence only people in their line of work understood. Elias picked it up, the paper smooth, almost too clean. Inside, a single photograph. A young woman, no older than 24, standing beside a rusted fountain. Her hair caught the winter sun like fire. The note beneath read, in bold, typewritten letters, Target, Isolde Weiss, daughter of Dr. Victor Weiss, traitor to the Directorate. Eliminate, no witnesses. The man in gray spoke at last, his voice as colorless as the fog outside. Her father stole state files. He vanished 3 weeks ago. She's the only thread left. Elias didn't flinch. And if she doesn't know anything, then she's still the daughter of a traitor. A pause stretched between them, sharp as broken glass. Elias nodded once. No questions, no emotion. That was how he'd survived this long. When the contact left, Elias remained seated, the photo still between his fingers. The young woman's expression wasn't defiant like most targets, it was distant, almost sorrowful. The kind of face that looked as though it had already lost too much. He folded the photograph, slipped it into his inner pocket, and rose. Outside, the cold bit at his skin. The kind of cold that seeped through years of discipline and secrecy. The mission was simple. Find her. Eliminate her. Vanish. But as the night deepened over Vienna, Elias couldn't shake the faint, unwelcome thought that whispered beneath the hum of the city. She doesn't look like someone guilty. And for the first time in years, the perfect soldier hesitated. The train to Salzburg cut through the Austrian countryside like a blade through fog. Elias sat by the window, his reflection flickering against the blurred landscape. Mountains ghosted with snow, villages half asleep beneath the weight of winter. In his mind, the mission repeated like a prayer stripped of faith. Locate, confirm, eliminate. He'd done this more times than he could count. Names, faces, assignments that faded into the static of memory. But this time, something gnawed at him. The eyes in that photograph, the way they seemed to carry a secret grief that had nothing to do with treason. When he arrived, he blended into the flow of strangers, leaving the platform. His cover was perfect, a businessman with a case of forged documents, a false passport, and a gun small enough to hide behind a folded newspaper. He'd memorized her routine from surveillance reports. She lived in a modest apartment above a bookshop, worked mornings at a flower stall near the river, and spent her evenings reading on a park bench no one else used in winter. Predictable, vulnerable, easy. By late afternoon, he found her. She was arranging lilies in a vase, her breath turning to mist in the cold air. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent, like someone trying to remember what beauty felt like. Elias stood a few meters away, pretending to examine a rack of postcards. When she looked up, her gaze caught his for an instant, just long enough to make him forget what his hands were supposed to do. There was something unguarded in her eyes, not fear, not suspicion, recognition. As if she'd seen him before, in another life neither of them remembered. He turned away first. Old habit. Distance was survival. That evening, he followed her home. She lived above a narrow street lined with shuttered cafes. The building leaned slightly, its plaster cracked by time. She paused at the door, fumbling with her keys, and for a brief second, she looked over her shoulder, straight at him. Elias froze in the shadows. Her voice broke the silence, quiet but steady. You can stop pretending. He stepped forward, instinctively reaching for the pistol beneath his coat. She didn't move, didn't run, just looked at him with weary resignation. I know why you're here, she said softly. They sent you because of my father. The wind carried her words through the narrow street. And in that fragile moment between hunter and hunted, Elias realized the reports were wrong. She wasn't running because she'd already stopped long ago. He lowered the gun, just slightly. Enough to make it a choice. Then you know what happens next, he said. Yes, she whispered, meeting his eyes. You decide whether it ends like theirs, or differently. For the first time in years, Elias felt something break loose inside him. Not weakness, but memory, the echo of every order he'd followed without question. And that night, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, the man who never missed his mark hesitated once more. The room above the bookshop smelled faintly of paper and jasmine tea. Elias stood in the doorway, his gun still hidden inside his coat, while Isolde Weiss poured hot water into a chipped porcelain cup, as if she were expecting company. "I thought you'd come sooner," she said, her voice calm, almost fragile. "Agents usually do." Elias said nothing. His eyes scanned the room, a small table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books, and a faded photograph of her father on the mantel. Victor Weiss, once a name whispered with reverence in the directorate, now cursed as the man who sold state secrets to foreign powers. "You don't seem surprised to see me," he finally said. "I stopped being surprised the day they called him a traitor," she answered. "Since then, everything has been predictable, even death." She turned to face him, her hands trembling only slightly as she set down the teapot. Her composure was unsettling, her acceptance almost defiant. "Where is your father?" Elias asked. "I don't know," she said, "but you wouldn't believe me even if I did." He studied her, searching for the lie that never came. She met his gaze with something dangerously close to pity. "I read about you once," she said quietly. "The directorate's ghost, the man who cleans up what others can't. They said you never fail." Elias didn't answer. His finger brushed the metal trigger, more out of reflex than intent. "Then why are you still here?" she asked. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the question settle in his chest. "Because you didn't run." A faint smile touched her lips, not of amusement, but of understanding. "There's nowhere left to run." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft against the windowpane. The city below carried on, oblivious to the moment that balanced between life and death. Isolde stepped closer. "If you're going to do it, at least tell me one thing. What? Was my father really a traitor?" Elias hesitated. "The reports said yes. The truth was Here he'd read the classified file, the part no one else saw. The stolen documents had exposed not enemies, but corruption, the kind that rotted nations from within. Victor Weiss had vanished before they could silence him. He should have told her nothing. Instead, he said, "Your father didn't betray the country. He betrayed the men who already sold it." Isolde's breath caught. Her hand covered her mouth, not in fear, in grief. "Then he was right." Elias nodded once. "And that's why they want you gone." The air between them thickened. His hand tightened on the gun. She took a single step forward, close enough that he could see the faint scar on her collarbone. "Then, finish it," she whispered. "If I die for the truth, at least let it be by someone who knows it." Elias lifted the gun. The world seemed to narrow, her heartbeat, his breathing, the soft hiss of snow melting against the glass. But when he pulled the trigger, there was no sound, because he'd aimed at the lamp instead. The room fell into darkness. "You were never my target," he said, turning toward the door. "Then, what happens now?" she asked through the shadows. Elias paused, hand on the doorknob. "Now, I make myself the target." And with that, he vanished into the night, leaving behind a woman who should have been a body, and a secret that could destroy them both. The morning came gray and unforgiving. The snow no longer looked pure. It looked like ash. Elias moved through the alleyways of Salzburg with the precision of a ghost, the pistol cold against his ribs, his mind replaying the sound that never came. He hadn't missed a shot in 12 years, but last night he had chosen not to pull the trigger. And now, the directorate would come for him. In their eyes, mercy was treason. By noon, the order had already spread across encrypted channels. Agent Elias Kerr, terminated with prejudice. He'd become what he had hunted all his life. In a windowless room deep beneath the Capitol, Colonel Marek tossed the printed report across a steel table. "He spared her," he said flatly. After confirming the target, across from him, Commander Helene Strauss, Elias's former handler, didn't look surprised. "He was the best we had. If he went off script, he must have had a reason." Marek slammed his hand on the table. "A reason doesn't erase betrayal. Find them both." Helene's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. When she was alone, she stared at the photograph attached to the file. Elias, in profile, his expression unreadable. She'd recruited him, trained him, watched him turn from man to weapon, and now, he was the enemy. Still, part of her couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't what it seemed. That night, Elias took refuge in an abandoned rail yard at the edge of the city. The place was a graveyard of iron and rust, carriages frozen in time, snow gathering like dust on forgotten tracks. He sat inside one of the old compartments, the silence pressing in on him. He replayed Isolde's words in his mind. If I die for the truth, at least let it be by someone who knows it. He'd spent years believing that obedience was purity, that following orders made him clean. But now, for the first time, he felt the stain of every life he'd taken. From his coat, he pulled out the file he'd stolen before leaving Vienna, the full dossier on Victor Weiss. The pages trembled slightly in his hands as he read. Names, dates, coordinates, proof of something much larger than treason. The directorate wasn't protecting the state, it was protecting itself. When he reached the final page, he found a letter, handwritten, the ink smudged but still legible. If anyone finds this, tell my daughter the truth is never a betrayal, only the silence is. Victor Weiss. Elias folded the paper carefully. His path was clear now. He couldn't save himself, but he could save her. He left the rail yard before dawn, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Every instinct screamed at him to disappear, to vanish as he'd been trained. But some things were heavier than survival. And as the first train whistles echoed across the city, he knew the hunt had already begun. Somewhere out there, Helene Strauss was coming for him, and she never missed her target. The wind howled through the mountain pass as Helene Strauss's convoy climbed toward Salzburg. Inside the lead car, she sat in silence, her gloved hands folded over the dossier. The soldiers around her whispered about Elias Kerr, about the agent who'd turned on the directorate, the ghost who'd vanished with a target still breathing. But Helene knew better. Elias didn't vanish, he calculated. Every disappearance, every silence was deliberate. She had taught him that. Years ago, in a training compound buried beneath the Carpathians, Helene had found a young recruit who never spoke, who could dismantle a pistol in 8 seconds, who never asked why. She'd seen something in him, not loyalty, but emptiness. The kind of void the directorate loved to fill. Never question the order, she'd told him during his final exam. Questioning is the first step to failure. Now, she couldn't help wondering if she'd created the very ghost she was chasing. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Colonel, orders are to shoot on sight. Not unless I say so, Helene replied coldly. If he's still alive, I want to know why. In Salzburg, Elias moved like smoke through the city. He had found Isolde again, in the same park where he'd first watched her from afar. This time, she was waiting for him. They've put a price on your head, she said, handing him a newspaper folded to hide the headline. Half the city's watching for you. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Then, it's only a matter of time. You could run, I could, he said, but they'd find you first. She looked away, guilt flickering across her face. You should have killed me that night. Maybe, Elias murmured, but I think your father would have hated me for it. Her expression softened at the mention of Victor Weiss. You knew him? Elias hesitated. Only through the lies they told. He pulled the folded letter from his coat and handed it to her. But I think he wanted you to know this. Isolde unfolded the paper, her breath catching as she recognized her father's handwriting. Tears blurred her vision before she even finished reading. He was alive long enough to write this. He was alive long enough to be right, Elias said quietly. He exposed them, and they buried him for it. She looked up, eyes fierce through the tears. Then we show the world. Elias shook his head. The world doesn't care about truth, it only cares about control. Then we find the ones who still care, she said. Together. For the first time, Elias didn't argue. That night, Helene arrived in the city. Her team spread out across districts, tracking every lead, every whisper of movement. But Helene went alone to the old rail yard. It was the kind of place Elias would choose, quiet, forgotten, full of exits. And there she found the burned remnants of his file. No body, no sign of struggle. Just a single bullet casing resting atop a page that hadn't burned completely. A fragment of handwriting, not official script, personal, deliberate. Truth is never treason. Helene stared at the words, her reflection flickering in the metal. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerous, doubt. The wind outside shifted, carrying the echo of a train whistle. And Helene Strauss, the woman who had taught Elias Kerr to kill without hesitation, felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold, because she realized what he was doing. He wasn't running. He was leading her somewhere. The blizzard came without warning. By dawn, Salzburg had vanished beneath a curtain of white, streets erased, bridges ghosted into fog. Elias moved through the storm with Isolde close behind him, their footprints the only proof they existed. Every instinct told him the net was tightening. The directorate moved fast when one of their own defected. They found shelter in an abandoned chapel on the city's edge, its roof half collapsed, the air thick with the scent of dust and old prayers. A single candle flickered on the altar, painting their shadows against the broken walls. Isolde's voice was barely a whisper. "You said they'll come for me, but why you too?" Elias crouched beside the window, scanning the empty road below. "Because I broke the first rule." I hesitated. She wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders. "That's not a crime. In our world," he said quietly, "mercy is treason." He adjusted the sight on his pistol, hands steady, despite the cold. Years of training had burned emotion out of him, but now, in this silence, he felt it bleeding back in the weight of her breathing, the fragile warmth of her presence. He turned to her. "We can't stay here long. Once they find the trail, they won't stop." She nodded, then hesitated. "You sound like someone planning to die." Elias didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a small black drive, the kind used only by directorate operatives. "Everything your father found is on this. Names, accounts, orders, enough to break them from the inside." Isolde stared at it, realization dawning. "You want me to run with this. I want you to survive with it. What about you?" "I'll make sure they follow me." Before she could respond, headlights cut through the snow outside. 3 vehicles, black and unmarked. Elias cursed under his breath. "They're here." He took her hand, pulling her toward the back exit. The wind roared through the shattered doorway as they stepped into the storm. Gunfire cracked in the distance, muffled by snow, precise and disciplined. "Directorate marksmen, go east," he shouted over the wind. "There's a train line 2 kilometers from here. Follow it until a bullet grazed the stone beside his head." He pulled her down behind a crumbling wall, returning fire in controlled bursts. Muzzle flashes lit the storm like lightning. Through the chaos, he saw her clutching the drive to her chest. Fear burned in her eyes, but not for herself, for him. "Elias," she cried, "you can't fight all of them." He gave a small, grim smile. "I don't need to. Just enough to buy time." She shook her head, tears freezing on her lashes. "Please, come with me." "Not yet." He stepped out into the open, disappearing into the veil of snow. His figure blurred, a shadow among ghosts, and then the storm swallowed him whole. Isolde ran, her breath ragged, the sound of gunfire fading behind her. She didn't look back. In the white silence, Elias moved like a phantom, leading the pursuers deeper into the hills. He knew Helene Strauss was close. He could almost feel her presence in the rhythm of the shots. He left a trail on purpose, clear, deliberate. Every footprint a message. And when the directorate's agents finally found the old railway tunnel at the base of the ridge, they realized too late it wasn't a hiding place. It was a trap. A series of charges detonated beneath the snow, the shockwave rolling through the valley like thunder. Flames erupted where the white silence had been moments before. From a distance, Helene watched through binoculars, expression unreadable. The heat shimmered against her lenses. "You always were a step ahead," she murmured. But deep down, she knew this wasn't his death. Elias Kurd didn't die in traps he built himself. Somewhere beyond the smoke, he was still moving. And she intended to find him. The tunnel still smoked hours after the blast. Snow hissed as it met the embers, and the scent of gunpowder hung thick in the air. Helene Strauss stood at the edge of the wreckage, the fur collar of her coat dusted with ash, her expression carved from ice. "Recover the bodies," she ordered. Her soldiers fanned out, stepping carefully through the debris. But as minutes turned to hours, no body matching Elias Kurd's description was found. Only weapons, bootprints, and a trail of blood leading into the woods. Helene closed her eyes. "You always did leave a signature." Elias stumbled through the forest, his vision swimming. The shrapnel had caught his side, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to bleed slowly, relentlessly. He pressed a hand to the wound, feeling the warmth seep between his fingers, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. He'd bought Isolde time, that was all that mattered. Snowflakes melted on his face as he leaned against a tree, catching his breath. The world tilted, blurred. He could almost hear her voice in the wind. "You sound like someone planning to die." Maybe he was, but not yet. Somewhere down the mountain, the faint hum of a train reached his ears, distant, steady. He smiled through the pain. If she'd made it to the tracks, she might already be gone. He tore a strip from his coat and tied it tight around his waist. Then he moved again, slower now, leaving crimson drops in the snow behind him. The forest thinned near dawn. He emerged into a clearing where an old signal tower leaned against the horizon, its metal bones half-eaten by rust. He climbed the stairs one careful step at a time until he reached the top platform. From there, he could see the valley stretched out below, and the line of dark vehicles winding through it like ants. Helene was still coming. Elias lit a flare and placed it on the railing. The red glow painted his face in ghostly light. He knew she would see it. He sat down beside the flickering flame, back against the cold metal, and waited. Hours later, Helene arrived at the tower alone. The snow had stopped. The air was sharp and silent. She climbed slowly, her boots echoing on the iron steps. Halfway up, she spotted the first drop of blood, dark against the frost. When she reached the top, she found him sitting exactly where she expected, pale, motionless, eyes half-lidded but alive. "Still dramatic," she said quietly. He gave a faint smile. "You taught me to make an exit count." Her gaze flicked to the wound on his side. "You should be dead." "I tried," he said dryly. "It didn't take." Helene crouched in front of him. "Where is she?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the horizon. "Far from here. Don't follow her. You know I can't promise that." "You could try." Helene studied him for a long moment, the flare light dancing across her eyes. "You're bleeding out, Elias. Give me the drive, and I can make this quick." He laughed, a quiet, broken sound. "You think I still have it?" Her jaw tightened. "You gave it to her. She deserved to live more than any of us." Helene's expression softened, but only slightly. "You just doomed yourself for her." "I've been doomed for years," he murmured. For a moment, the wind was the only thing between them. Two ghosts, bound by training and regret. Finally, she drew her pistol, not with hatred, but with sorrow. "They'll send others. If I don't bring you in, they'll send someone who won't hesitate." Elias met her eyes. "Then make it look real." She hesitated. "You trust me that much?" He smiled faintly. "No. But I trust what you taught me. Sometimes mercy is the only way to win." Helene exhaled, lowering the gun just enough. Then, with a motion too fast for the watching drones to see, she fired into the railing beside him. The bullet sparked against steel. Elias fell back as if struck, the flare light flickering over his face. Helene caught his body before it hit the floor, whispering, "Stay down. They'll believe it." Through the ringing in his ears, Elias heard her voice, softer now, trembling in a way he'd never known. "You always were my best student." He wanted to thank her, but darkness swept over him like a tide. Below, her soldiers saw the flare fade and assumed a mission complete. When they climbed the tower minutes later, they found Helene standing alone beside the blood-stained railing. "Target neutralized," she said calmly. They never checked the hollow beneath the stairs, where a barely breathing man lay hidden beneath the snow. The world returned to Elias Kerr in fragments, breath first, then pain. The air tasted like rust and cold metal. Above him, the underside of the signal tower groaned softly with the wind. Snow had drifted in during the night, covering part of his body like a burial shroud. He blinked, forcing his vision into focus. Every muscle screamed when he tried to move, but he was alive, barely. Helene had shot wide, just as she promised. He pressed a trembling hand to his side. The bleeding had slowed but hadn't stopped. When he tried to sit up, something slipped from his coat pocket. A folded scrap of paper, stained crimson. Not the letter from Victor Weiss. A new one, Helene's handwriting. "If you live, finish what we couldn't. They're coming for her. I bought you 12 hours. Use them well." Her name wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cold keep him conscious. 12 hours. That was all. By the time Elias reached the valley, the sun had risen, weak and pale, as if afraid to touch the snow. Every step was agony. He moved through the forest like a shadow unraveling, guided by instinct more than sight. His destination was clear, the Eastern Rail Line. Isolde would try to board the freight train, heading for Prague. It was the only route out that wasn't under Directorate control. But he knew the Directorate well. They'd predict that too. At a clearing near the tracks, he spotted movement, black coats against the white horizon. Too many, they were already here. Elias crouched behind the wreck of an old wagon, breathing shallowly. Through the gaps, he saw Isolde, in the distance, standing near the edge of the platform. Her hands clutched the small drive beneath her scarf. She was waiting for the train, unaware that death waited closer. He checked his gun, one full magazine, one half empty, and a single grenade from the rail yard. It wasn't much. He wiped the blood from his hand onto the snow, drawing a small symbol beside him, a signal from Directorate Field Code. 3 parallel lines crossed by one diagonal / eyes above. He left it there, a message Helene would understand if she ever came back. Then he moved. The first agent fell before he even saw the muzzle flash. Elias's bullet found the gap beneath his collarbone, clean, silent. He shifted position, counting the rhythm between shots. 1, 2, move. Panic spread through the squad as they realized they weren't hunting anymore, they were being hunted. Isolde turned at the sound of gunfire, eyes wide with recognition. Elias waved her down from across the tracks. Run, but she didn't. Instead, she ducked behind a pillar, clutching the drive. Bullets sparked off steel and stone. Elias darted toward her, cutting down 2 more operatives with surgical precision. But his body betrayed him, every step slower, every breath shallower. He reached her just as the last agent raised his rifle. Elias threw himself in front of her. The impact slammed through his back like a hammer. He fired once more, the shot finding its mark. Then silence. Isolde caught him as he fell, lowering him to the frozen ground. His blood bloomed across the snow, dark and vivid, like ink spreading on paper. No, she whispered, pressing her hands over the wound. Stay with me. He tried to speak, but his voice was barely a breath. Train, take the drive, go. I'm not leaving you. You have to. He managed a faint smile, his breath misting in the cold air. If I die here, it'll mean something. Tears slid down her cheeks. Why would you do this for me? His eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the train's whistle echoed faintly through the valley. Because I was sent to end a life, and instead, I found one worth saving. She leaned closer, her tears falling onto his face like rain. The train thundered past, shaking the earth. When the last carriage disappeared into the distance, Elias's hand slipped from hers. But before it fell completely, she saw something written across the snow beside him, lines traced with his blood. Truth lives. And then his hand went still. At the top of the ridge, unseen by either of them, Helene watched through the scope of her rifle. Her breath clouded the glass. When the shot never came, she lowered the weapon and whispered to the wind, "Goodbye, Elias." Then she turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving no tracks behind. The freight train roared through the frozen countryside like a wounded beast. Inside one of the cargo cars, Isolde sat on the floor, clutching the metal drive against her chest. The wheels thundered beneath her, each turn of the track pulling her further from Salzburg, further from the man who had saved her and left his life in the snow. The wind howled through the broken seams of the car, cold enough to numb her fingers but not her memory. Elias's final words echoed inside her mind. If I die here, it'll mean something. She opened the drive. It was encrypted, of course, layers of directorate code wrapped around secrets heavy enough to topple governments. But her father had taught her some of it when she was a child. He used to say, every wall has a door if you learn how to listen. Now, she listened. For hours, she typed command lines into the small terminal built into the device. Finally, with a soft click, the encryption broke. The screen flickered, revealing documents marked Classified Omega Directive. She scrolled through the names, ministers, generals, financiers, all part of the same network. It wasn't treason, Victor Weiss had uncovered. It was the truth. The directorate wasn't defending the nation. It was selling it, one secret at a time. Tears blurred her vision. Her father had died for this. Elias had bled for it. She pulled a small transmitter from her bag, one of her father's prototypes, capable of broadcasting on multiple encrypted frequencies. The signal was weak, but she didn't need to reach the directorate. She needed the world. Isolde connected the drive and began to send files, photographs, letters, the entire archive. The screen blinked as data spilled into the digital ether. When the upload reached 70%, a red light flashed on the console. Someone was intercepting. She froze. The directorate had found the signal, hundreds of miles away, in a subterranean command room beneath Vienna. Alarms flared. Technicians shouted over each other as a woman strode in, Helene Strauss. Her coat was soaked with melted snow. Where's the signal coming from? Eastern line, near the border. She's broadcasting the Weiss files. One technician replied. We're trying to jam it. Helene's pulse quickened. Try harder. The screens filled with scrambled data, the upload flickering between progress and interference. Helene watched the percentage rise, -83%, 89%, 94%, every second a nail in the directorate's coffin. She's almost through, someone warned. Then pull the plug, Helene said coldly. The technician hesitated. That would trigger the satellite lockdown. Do it. The lights flickered. The room fell silent. The screens went black. Helene exhaled slowly. Is it done? Signal terminated at 97%, a voice replied. Most of the data got out, but not all. Trace it, she said. I want to know where she is. On the train, the console sparked violently, smoke curling from the wires. Isolde yanked the plug, coughing. The transmission was over, incomplete. But it was enough. She pulled the drive free and tucked it into her coat. For the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt purpose. The train began to slow as it approached the border. She peered out through the cracked door, fields stretching endlessly beneath a red dawn. Freedom, maybe, or another trap. She jumped. The snow broke her fall, cold and merciless. She rolled, gasping, and pushed herself up. In the distance, headlights glowed, vehicles racing down the border road. They were coming. She turned and began to run toward the forest. The drive pressed against her heart. Every step was agony, but the thought that 97% of the truth was already out kept her moving. Behind her, a voice called her name, clear, sharp, impossible. She froze. For a heartbeat, she thought it was the wind. Then she turned and saw a figure at the edge of the tree line, limping, bloodstained, alive. Elias Kerr. Her breath caught. He raised a hand, silencing her. No time. They're tracking you through the residual signal. She stumbled toward him. I thought you were dead. Not yet, he said with a faint smile. Helene made sure of that. Before she could answer, the distant hum of engines grew louder. Come on, he said, taking her hand. We finish this together. And as dawn bled across the sky, the trader's daughter and the ghost of the directorate vanished into the forest, hunted by an empire built on lies, carrying the last fragments of truth. The forest was a labyrinth of ice and breath. The rising sun cast long red fingers through the branches, painting the snow with the color of blood. Elias moved first, guiding Isolde through the frozen undergrowth. Each step was measured, deliberate, his body failing, but his will unbroken. Behind them, engines roared. The directorate's final hunt had begun. They won't stop, Isolde whispered. Not until we're both dead. I know, Elias said, steady but faint. But we only need to reach the ridge. What's there? He didn't answer right away. When they broke through the trees, she saw it, an abandoned communications tower perched on a cliff, its steel skeleton twisting toward the sky, old, unstable, but still wired. Elias turned to her. Your father built a failsafe into every encryption network. It's mirrored here. If we reach the main console, you can finish the upload, the last 3%. Her breath caught. And I'll hold them off. She shook her head, gripping his arm. No. We do this together. Elias's eyes softened. For the first time, he didn't look like an assassin. He looked like a man tired of killing. You remind me of him, he said quietly. He believed truth was worth dying for. So do I. The moment lingered, fragile and fleeting. Then the first bullet shattered the silence. They ran for the tower, snow exploding around their boots as rounds tore through the trees. Elias turned, firing in controlled bursts, dropping to pursuers before ducking behind a frozen boulder. The pain in his side burned with every movement. Go, he shouted. Isolde sprinted up the metal stairs, her hands shaking as she climbed. At the top, the console waited, ancient but still humming with faint power. She connected the drive and began to type. Below, Elias reloaded his last magazine. 3 bullets. That was all. Through the sight of his pistol, he saw Helene approaching calm, unhurried, her black coat rippling in the wind. She was alone. Stand down, Elias, she called. You've done enough damage. He lowered the gun slightly, stepping from behind cover. You made sure I lived. Was that your idea of mercy? No, Helene said. It was your punishment. You think you've freed her. You've only painted a target on her back. Then take it off, he said. She hesitated. The snow fell between them like ashes. It's too late for both of you. Above them, Isolde's voice echoed through the tower. Upload, complete. Helene's head snapped upward. Elias saw her expression change, not anger, not fear, but inevitability. You just doomed us all, she whispered. Elias smiled faintly. No, Helene, we just made it fair. She raised her gun. He did the same. 2 shots rang out. Only one hit. Helene staggered backward, blood blooming against the white. For a moment, she looked almost relieved. You finally surpassed me, she breathed. Make it mean something. Then she fell. Elias turned toward the tower, his knees weakening. He climbed the steps slowly, each one heavier than the last. Isolde met him at the top, her hands trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. It's done, she said. The files went global. Journalists, agencies, governments, they'll all see. He smiled through the blood on his lips. Then it was worth it. No, she whispered, catching him as he collapsed. Not like this. He leaned against her shoulder, the wind howling through the tower's broken beams. Promise me something. Anything. Don't run from what you've done. Don't hide. Speak for him. For me. She nodded, tears freezing against her skin. I promise. Elias looked out over the valley, the same mountains he'd crossed as a shadow, now bathed in pale light. Funny, he murmured, his voice fading. I was sent to end a life, and found one instead. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed. The snow fell quietly around them, erasing footprints, blood, and the past. Epilogue. 6 months later, the directorate was gone. Its leaders arrested, its secrets laid bare before the world, nations condemned, regimes toppled. In a crowded city square, Isolde Weiss stood before a sea of people and cameras. She wore no uniform, no symbol, only a pendant that had once belonged to her father. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. The truth cost lives, my father's, and a man who believed mercy could change the world. But his belief was right, because truth doesn't die when men fall. It lives when someone dares to speak. The crowd was silent, listening. He told me once that mercy was treason in the world of killers. Maybe it is. But if mercy is treason, then let the whole world rebel. When she stepped away from the podium, snow began to fall again, soft and endless, the same kind that had once covered a man's last words written in blood. Truth lives, and this time, it did.